Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon for those joining us from Seoul. So my name is Irina Kustova. I'm head of the energy program here at SEPS, and wishing you a nice start of the week. And I'm pleased to welcome you to the final event, Partners in Transition, What Next for EU-Korea Green Industrial Leadership. So today's event is a discussion and the presentation of the results of the study, which was conducted by SEPS, Center for European Policy Studies, throughout last 8 months, and it will be published in upcoming days. It was kindly supported by the Korea Foundation. So the study aimed to look into what are the opportunities that the European Union and Korea can work together and can stand in these turbulent times in clean tech, in decarbonisation, and reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. We will have a presentation with findings, and it will be moderated by my colleagues Christian Dietz and Fanny Sauvignon a bit later. And we will be having also distinguished speakers joining us today. But now we are honored to give the floor to Minister Rue, Economic Minister at the Mission of Korea to the EU, for congratulatory remarks. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the Center for European Policy Studies for your kind invitation and for organizing today's event. As the Economic Minister of Korean Mission to European Union, I'm happy to have this opportunity to extend my heartfelt congratulations on this meaningful occasion. The SEPS has consistently provided high-quality analysis and hosted insightful events. My colleagues and I have gained valuable insights on EU-related issues through the SEPS. Therefore, we are very pleased to hear about the Center's research on green partnership between Korea and EU. In recent years, we have seen unprecedented level of economic, cultural, and people-to-people exchange between Korea and EU. I sincerely hope this positive momentum will also extend to the exchange of technologies and experience in green transition and climate action. Today, we are eager to listen to your views about this partnership and what expectations exist for its future. Since establishing diplomatic relationship in 1963, the Republic of Korea and the European Union has deepened their ties, elaborating them to a strategic partnership in 2010. Our cooperation has since expanded into forward-looking areas such as security, digital innovation, public health, and green transition. The EU-Korea Green Partnership, signed on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of our diplomatic relationship, reflect our shared commitment to enhance cooperation in climate action, environmental protection, and the energy transition. As green partners, Korea and the EU are actively contributing to global environmental efforts and pushing forward with ambitious policies to achieve the shared goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. The EU has operated the emission trading system for 20 years and is advancing policies such as CBAM to prevent carbon leakage. Meanwhile, Korea has operated and developed KETS to foster environment where carbon-reducing companies can reach the market. A broad set of policy tools and measures have promoted green technology R&I and sustainable business model. Carbon neutrality requires collective global action. When like-minded countries such as ours build successful partnership, we demonstrate the power of cooperation and inspire broad collective action toward this objective. As the climate crisis deepens, concerns are growing about the weakening of global climate leadership and the slowdown in carbon reduction efforts. But today, the green transition is no longer just a goal of environmentalists. It is a key driver of market competitiveness and economic security. We now live in a time when the question is not if we should pursue a green transition, but how we can achieve it, despite the political and economic complexity involved. Our partnership and this research are part of these efforts to find practical pathway and accelerate global progress. That's why today's event, organized by SEPS, after gathering input from many stakeholders, is so meaningful. Today's diverse perspective will provide valuable and constructive input to our collaborations. My sincere thanks and congratulations to the research team at SEPS for making this event possible. And thank you all for being here today. And I'm certain this will be a valuable and enriching experience for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your kind words and these important remarks. I'm also glad to announce that we have received a video address from MEP Cesar Luena, who is chair of the delegation for relation with the Korea Peninsula. Mr. MEP Luena sent us a video address as he is traveling to Madrid this morning, and we will play it now.
Good morning, and thank you to the Center of European Studies for your invitation to this event to conclude the study on the EU-Republic of Korea Green Partnership. In recent years, the European Union has made progress with a clear objective, leading the fight against climate change through the European Green Deal. This commitment was born in response to the demands of a generation that took to the streets through movements such as Fridays for Future, also in South Korea, to demand that science be listened to and that forceful action be taken to limit global warming. In the European Union, that momentum enabled us to pass key laws to protect our forests, our soils, our waters, and of course, our biodiversity. Yet today, the global landscape for decarbonisation is distorted by fragmented ambitions, growing protectionism, and the instrumentalization of energy and supply chains dependence. Climate and environmental protection policies are still on the European Union's agenda, but we must admit that under the pretext of simplification, the new conservative majority and the far right of the European Parliament are weakening the rules of the Union and trying to silence those who defend it. These policies also remain high on the agenda of the Republic of Korea, and our relationship between the EU and South Korea is more strategic than ever, recently encouraged by a vision of international relations and a geopolitical configuration that we did not have 6 months ago. The recent EU-Korea security and defense partnerships and South Korea's accession to Horizon Europe, for example, help frame the green industrial transition as a common, innovation-driven security imperative. The European Union and the Republic of Korea share common interests and values, and we will reach a good understanding on what we intend. However, we must be very attentive to the emerging currents that, using disinformation, walk the path towards denialist positions and climate and environmental postponement. These are propelling our societies and great speed towards an increasingly uncertain future. Climate ambition, environmental protection, and decarbonisation policies are not a whim. They respond to the fundamental need to protect our citizens, our biodiversity, our planet, and finally, our future. Therefore, it is an imperative to address them at the planetary level. Its results are called to improve the quality of life of people and the competitiveness of those economies that incorporate them. I have no doubt that in the European Union and also in the Republic of Korea, we will be able to face these challenges within and between our regions in a coordinated way, and we will continue working to strengthen our agreements and contemplate new partnerships committed to green policies. I hope, honestly, this reflection leads to fruitful discussions. Thank you so much.
That's great to hear these very encouraging remarks by MEP Luenes, which I think are setting the scene a bit for the discussion we are going to have now. So I'm very pleased to give the floor to my colleague Fanny Sauvignon, foreign policy researcher here at SEPS, who will now start the discussion and will co-moderate the session. So Fanny, the floor is yours. And probably just before, I would like to welcome all the participants. I see you are joining our event. Just to post your questions in the dedicated Q&A box. So we will keep an eye on it, and we will have time to discuss them later during this event. So Fanny, I think the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Irina, and thank you to the distinguished speakers who gave us their congratulatory and remarks and important reminders of the current situation. As you said, with this project, we are trying to see what is next for the EU-Korea Green Industrial Partnership and to understand this partnership, and also towards EU audiences to better understand South Korea's green policy trajectory as well. But first, I would like to provide some context on the partnership, although very quickly, because Minister Liu gave very important elements about the strategic partnership, more than 60 years of diplomatic relations, and this green partnership on the 60th diplomatic anniversary, and a really expanding policy areas for cooperation in this fragmented world. And we will also talk about South Korea joining Horizon Europe as an associated country later on with the Korea Europe Research Center. And, you know, we're looking at a snapshot of this year 2025, because a lot is happening. So not only do we have this, you know, stronger than ever EU-Korea partnership, but we have big changes abroad, including with the second Trump administration in the US. We have an evolving also evolving policies in the EU, focus on competitiveness, the clean industrial deal earlier this year that also match the vocabulary we hear also from the concepts we hear from South Korea, which is headed to the polls for presidential elections early next month. But there are more milestones coming. There's COP30 at the end of the year, and from next year, something we will delve into more in detail later, the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism that will go into full effect in 2026. So from a perspective of EU researchers, there are some key questions we had. First, about, you know, the partner Korea, what are key elements for an EU audience to understand Korea's green policy trajectory? And with the upcoming elections, you know, what can we expect for this future direction, which we expect to align with the EU's? And also to know how the EU's evolving climate strategies are being received by South Korea. In general, how can we better align for mutual engagement, research and development and innovation together? And something that people may be familiar with is, you know, how EU climate policy is perceived externally, and sometimes how EU policy in general is perceived as powerful regulations that have a global impact. So we're looking at these elements, and at the same time taking into account the global parameters, the geopolitical tensions, trade tariff wars, and also because the EU and South Korea have not only committed to bilateral green partnership, but also on the international stage and at multilateral level. How can we uphold and mutually support each other there? So after this, you know, brief concepts to put these pieces together, in our study, part of the focus was to provide elements for EU policy audiences to understand the Korean green policy framework. So, you know, I'm not going to proceed to a full historical recap, but really to provide elements to understand key evolutions and concepts in Korean green policies. And later on, my colleague Chris will provide some elements related to, you know, the emissions profile, really the economic growth. But if we look at political concept, and, you know, there will be a bit more detail about this in the reports that is upcoming after the 1980s, which, you know, comes after the rapid government-led industrialization of the 60s, 70s. The Korean economy, the Korean government was focusing on stabilizing the economy. There were also some early nuclear and natural gas policies after the oil crisis of the 70s. And then quickly in 97 was South Korea's democratization movements, and that culminated into constitutional revision and direct presidential elections. And this was important to embed environmental rights in the constitution, and also understand that Korea is a strong presidential republic. So when we're going to look at elements of key green policies, we're going to take this into account. The policies of specific presidents. In the 1990s was for Korea a focus to globalization, overall liberalization, financial, economic, etc., with OECD accession, WTO membership, and as you may be aware, there was also the Asian financial crisis in 1997 that led to a lot of economic reforms, and at the same time, Korea recovered rather quickly. Korea's economy recovered rather quickly. During the same decades, the legal framework for environmental policies was created, paving the way for a more structured approach to climate, environmental, energy policies in the future. In the 2000s, we can say that Korea was really an advanced open market economy, quite resilient. There was some political alternance that happened. And there was also the introduction of sustainable development as both, a domestic goal and an international commitment. And what the concept I want to, emphasize for the next few remarks is that of green growth, which is still a defining concept of South Korean green policy. It frames green policy as a source of growth, growth achieved by being energy and resource efficient, reducing climate change and its impacts, and at the same time providing economic growth, green job creation, green technology investments. It was initiated by President Lee Myung-bak back in 2008-2009 and enacted into law with the Framework Act on Low Carbon Green Growth, or LCGG, in 2010. It was quite an important conceptual turn. This green growth concept was kept in Korean policy, even in the Framework Act that replaced the LCGG in 2021, the Carbon Neutrality Act, which we're going to discuss very shortly. So what you need to remember is that green growth reconciles climate and environmental policies with the economic growth agenda. It also implies some private and industrial sector buy-in for, an focus on green exports. It implies a focus on industrial innovation, R&D investments. It is supported by Korea's emissions trading system, which will be discussed by my colleague. And it is also a globally promoted model by Korea for other economies that are aiming to reconcile economic competitiveness and climate policies. Okay, now because, Korea, and I've got pictures of the last two presidents of South Korea, which I think can be quite useful for, EU policy audiences to place faces on these evolutions and understand what kind of political turning points that Korea is in now. So we looked at the evolution of policies for the last two presidents before the 2025 elections. So we had the Moon Jae-in administration from 2017 to 2022 that was characterized by a real focus on renewable energy development and increasing renewable energy targets, electricity generation targets by 2030, boosting solar photovoltaic, offshore wind with limited results. And at the same time, in parallel, entering a phase out for nuclear energy. This was also in the political atmosphere of after Fukushima and the nuclear disaster and the long-term implications. This was quite a big announcement, this policy phase out, because Korea's nuclear industry is very strong to this day. There was some introduction of, there were some debates in the Korean public with a public deliberation on resuming the construction of nuclear plants. And the Korean public remains ambivalent about nuclear power, and at the same time, it is a strong industry and it provides a large part of the energy mix and the decarbonized energy mix in Korea. Another key, really, the green policy Moon Jae-in is known with is the Korean Green New Deal, which is nearly 96 billion USD equivalent initial investment plan in green jobs, infrastructure, green R&D, innovation, with nationwide projects, and that was reinforced throughout Moon Jae-in's presidency. In 2021, the Carbon Neutrality Act, which we saw last slide as replacing the Green Growth Act, but still including a green growth element to the act. So by 2050, which is a legally binding target for Korea to become carbon neutral, how can the green growth concepts and South Korean society become a carbon neutral society? This became a law, and at the same in parallel, South Korea updated its nationally determined contribution commitments with the UNFCCC to be more ambitious on decarbonization and put sectoral energy targets on these ambitions. And so the president, now that is actually technically out of office as of last month, April 2025, is Yoon Suk-yeol, who was ruling from 2022 to 2025. So because he's essentially from the opposition party as compared to Moon Jae-in, there are some political lines that come with it in terms of energy, green, climate policies. The main difference was that Yoon promoted a nuclear energy revival, placing nuclear energy at the heart of Korea's decarbonization, raising targets, resuming construction of nuclear plants, and at the same time give a smaller focus on renewables towards these decarbonization targets, and also a specific focus on hydrogen, beside nuclear, on hydrogen in all its forms. Hydrogen was already promoted in the Green New Deal of the previous president, but this is really a bigger focus we've seen in the last years. The Green New Deal was not necessarily kept, as it's a very, political vision, political strategy, but certain projects were continued. And the Carbon Neutrality Act, of course, as a legally binding agreement, was maintained. Its goals were maintained. Its ambitions were modified, and industrial targets for decarbonization were a bit adjusted in business-friendly policies. And the term used, or its translation, is that Korea was looking for a realistic carbon neutrality path. That was the narrative that was maintained. So here's a quick, contrasting table for understanding. What can be understood is that political alternance does matter in South Korea's system. It is a multi-party system, but much like in the United States, there are two big mainstream parties. The Liberal Democratic Party of Korea and the Conservative People Power Party. And then briefly, although it's not the topic of today, the fact that there was, a martial law and then political crisis that are leading to the elections of next month means that there are a lot of debates on national level. Initially, the elections were meant to be held in 2027 when Yoon would step down from power. But with the martial law and impeachment crisis, this is accelerating the debate, and it is bringing back a lot of national debates. So on South Korean democracy, on its institutions, possible reforms. At the same time, a concern over trade relations with the US under Trump 2.0, and the fact that Seoul and Washington keep talks very active in this key period, even before there is a new president in place. I am not mentioning here too much security issues, but of course, they are always in the background with the presence of North Korea. And of course, a real focus on economic revitalization, industrial policy. So what does it look like in terms of campaign pledges? So we've got these two big party candidates, Lee Jae-myung on the Democratic Party side and Kim Moon-soo on the People Power Party side. Lee Jae-myung is currently given as poll favorite, so it remains to be seen what happens next month. A key difference with its Democratic Party predecessors, so from the same party, is that now nuclear phase out is not really on the table. It is understood as part of a balanced energy mix towards decarbonization. Still, under the liberal green policy usual lines, expanding renewables remains a priority, but nuclear phase out is no longer considered. And then on the People Power Party side, nuclear expansion remains in the same dynamics that it was under Yoon Suk-yeol. More constructions, more R&D investments, more international cooperation for nuclear export industries. Both candidates are campaigning on economic growth because this topic cannot be avoided. Both parties are engaged in dialogues with industries to support these industries, their energy needs, in particular AI infrastructure, which is an important campaign topic nowadays. Then we can draw some more implications from past political alternance, legislative, presidential legacy. Lee Jae-myung was running the Democratic Party, including during Yoon's presidency, and there were some ideas from the party for a clean tech industrial policy that would be similar to something like the Inflation Reduction Act in the US or the Net Zero Industry Act in the EU. So it remains to be seen, if something, would advance in the National Assembly if Lee Jae-myung is to be elected. And on the other side, People Power Party candidate Kim Moon-soo focusing on really the business-friendly aspect of policies, also pension reforms for fiscal sustainability, given the demographic challenges of South Korea, and short mention of security issues, because security issues in Korea imply strong international relations, in particular with the United States, which, for stronger US security alignment is emphasized by the People Power Party. On the side of the Democratic Party as well, with also more mentions of Japan, which is relatively recent. In recent years, Korea and Japan becoming closer on security cooperation is a relatively recent development, but not just on security cooperation. We're going to discuss it later. Also on the global climate frameworks. One last element that is technically not directly related to the elections that I want to mention is that in August 2024, there was a landmark case of the Constitutional Court of Korea brought before the court by young climate activists. And that resulted in the court deciding that parts of the Carbon Neutrality Act are unconstitutional because despite 2030 and 2050 objectives for decarbonization, it is missing targets in between and a realizable plan to achieve this, and therefore that it fails to protect the rights of future generations. The government has already reacted to say that it will fix this in early 2025, and the deadline to amend this act based on the court's proceedings is early next year, February 2026. So whoever is in power will have to deal with 2030 to 2050 decarbonization pathways. So now, and this was a mini preview into the next part. My colleague later will come back to Korea's green trajectory in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, economic growth, etc. But for now, let me stop sharing my screen. There will be more presentations later. For now, I'm really glad to pass the floor to Mr. Nicolas Ardito from DG Clima of the European Commission, who is a senior expert on international bilateral relations. And may have some immediate feedback. I don't know. I am curious to hear your remarks. Thank you very much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Fanny. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me, and nice to be here online. So you have mentioned many relevant points. Yeah, I even learned things that I didn't know as I follow Korea and a few other countries in Asia from climate diplomacy bilateral perspective in DG climate action. I was there, so I started following Korea 3 years ago, which means that I was able to shape and to negotiate the text of the Green Partnership in 2023. Which was in itself an interesting process. We have to remember, you asked me to say a few words about the Green Partnership, so I will dig into that. It is important to remind that the Green Partnership is an MOU and a Memorandum of Understanding, so it basically contains political commitments. It has a very light, if any, governance, and so it's based on goodwill. So it's based on the goodwill of the two sides to get together and cooperate on the transition. We thought back in the day that South Korea, for the many reasons you mentioned in your historical excursus, is an important partner to match up with because of their legislative commitment to climate neutrality and quite ambitious 2030 targets, even though we would have liked to see more ambition. But okay, I mean, it was a sufficient level at that time that we thought it was going in the right direction. So so basically, after we adopted 2 years ago at the summit, I don't remember exactly the dates, but it was perhaps even exactly 2 years ago, on the 12th of May. The Green Partnership, we had a kickoff meeting later in the year with online, in which we discussed possible area of cooperation, and then we also had the launch of a dedicated project that is based in Korea, which is founded by the EU, the Green Partnership Project. And also we had the possibility of using other funds of another project called the EU Climate Dialogues. So we, in some cases, with the support of these two instruments, we developed a few activities already in the beginning of 2024. What the Koreans are particularly fond of is that we organized a study tour on the emission trading system to Europe. Because Korea in the last couple of years they were looking at upgrading their ETS, as it has some issues with regard to low prices of allowances and low liquidity and others. So they were keen to see how we overcome those problems also back in the day. And then we also had activities in Seoul related to offshore wind power that you mentioned is a challenging area in Korea, or rather than challenging, an area where there is, I mean, Korea is one of those countries that is not at the forefront of offshore wind power deployment, and so we had a dedicated event panel, and also with the presence of the private sector held in Seoul. And also we went again with and I'm coming back to this, underlying a little bit the presence of the private sector, because we think the business dimension is very important in our relationship in our green relationship with Korea. So we had 3 separate and quite well attended interactive workshops on the enhancement of energy grids, which are key as we expand the renewable energies, both in Korea and the EU, but also on green hydrogen and on sustainable mobility. So I was mentioning that the light governance that we have, that is not fully spelled out. Basically, what we do is try to take the opportunities of any meeting, like official meeting. So for instance, last week there was a joint committee between the EU and Korea. So I was there briefly to mention both the multilateral dimension, so what we would like to see at COP30, but also where we could cooperate further in the Green Partnership. But perhaps more importantly, we have two strands. The most important strand is a working group on energy, environment, and climate that meets every year. And the last time it met in Seoul in October 2024, and my head of unit traveled there to show the importance that we attach to that working group, and also as perhaps the main steering institutional instrument for the implementation of the Green Partnership. And then we also have the strand of the Trade and Sustainable Development Committee, which is part of the FTA. And in that also happens every year. And in that opportunity, we try, besides explaining to each other how we are implementing the Paris Agreement, which is a commitment that we have in our FTA, we also scope for opportunities for further cooperation, which, in my view, they should always be kind of in the realm of the trade and climate nexus. So we. In that forum, we launched the idea of cooperating, for instance, on green shipping, which of course is key for trade, and we're going to do that. And another topic that now exchange, but my mind, but I think we underline the importance as well of offshore wind power, in which of course the EU has still an edge, and so trade and investment can be further enhanced. So one element that is clearly related to what you said, and it will depend to some extent also on the result of the elections, is precisely the way we are going to project the increased competitiveness angle in the EU. So that we have seen in this new commission with the competitiveness compass, and then the clean industrial deal, and then everything that will come after. So we think that in general, with the partners such as Korea, which should increase the further interaction and the approximation, not only between governmental departments, but also of our business community, whether that is in how we finance the transition, or how if we do think that is necessary to introduce resilience criteria. I mean, there are a few areas where we should be discussing, and so there are spaces that we could fill. But as you said, we need to see also how it goes. The election in next month. I didn't mention last year in the margins of the working group, we also organized an NDC event. So NDC, we were entering, and we are in full and new NDCs period. So of course, it's now at that time it was a bit easier. Now it's a bit more difficult because the EU is a little bit late on this. But of course, we always claim, rightly so, that our partners should not worry, because our NDC will be ambitious and will provide a strong signal. We just hope that it's going to be on time, and we trust it will be. So before the synthesis report of the UN in September, ahead of the COP. But of course, we at that time we organized the NDC event to put the issue on the table, so that it's important that partners like Korea lead by the example in their region of the world with a new NDC that is ambitious, and so that it can inspire also other countries, because if we have anyway, I mean, we have seen a mixed bag so far. There are countries that have put out very ambitious NDCs, like the UK, and others that have held back ambitious also in that part of the world, such, just to mention one, New Zealand. So we think that it's important that Korea provides a strong signal, and of course we cannot push on timing considering the elections. And also, as you mentioned, Fanny, it would be also important to see how the next government will tackle the intermediate targets, climate targets from 2031, which will be covered by the next NDC, but also beyond, so 2036, 2050. So it will be interesting to see what kind of trajectory Korea wants to follow, and we hope that it's going to be a faster trajectory or a faster trajectory first, because we think that the last percentile of emissions are the hardest to get rid of, and the ones that are most expensive. So we think that existing technologies should allow for going fast, especially in advanced economies like Korea and the EU. So this is, in most cases I mentioned energy or climate topics on which we have been collaborating. But soon we would also, so we should be starting later this year, just to give you an idea, to cooperate also on climate adaptation, which is also important. Also with the possibility of a business angle, considering that climate adaptation, in perhaps the huge challenge is probably to make a business case for climate adaptation. It's easier to make a business case for renewable, but for climate adaptation is a bit more difficult. So we hope we're going to also start more concretely and having a technical exchange followed by a seminar on green shipping corridors, considering the importance that Korea has on ship building, but also on trade. And then we also will continue to exchange on carbon pricing. Give you an idea, an example. Korea covers in their emission trading system waste. We do not at the moment, but we are reflecting whether waste should be included. So it could be interesting to get the feedback, the insights from Korea. So also to show that this is a real partnership. It's not just us telling or sharing our experiences. Of course, CBAM is connected to carbon pricing as a very important issue for Korea. They have been extremely active, extremely attentive to every single piece of news and legislation that is coming out. And our colleagues in the taxation and customs department are actually very grateful for this attention and in-depth studies of the CBAM legislation, because it allowed to actually identify some shortcomings. So I'm not saying that it's because of Korea that, but the contribution has been important and very appreciated. So what I wanted to last mention is that we're not dealing in the Green Partnership only with climate issues, which of course I follow directly, or energy issues that sometimes are very, most of the time, very connected with decarbonization, on which we have the collaboration with DG Energy, but also DG Environment has a very important stake. So they are looking, just to mention, to collaborate on circular economy, also very important, obviously, for emissions reduction, but also on deforestation, on air pollution, so all areas that are relevant both in the EU and Korea. And of course, there are the Green Partnership doesn't stop there. If you have had a look at the document, it's not a long document; it's a 5-page document, but it does go into other areas of cooperation. So indeed, the first one is business cooperation, in which we would like to step up our efforts, and then of course, research and innovation. You mentioned the Horizon Europe, a very important accession of Korea, which I think it's in the final technical details. I mean, the negotiation is closed, but it's a question now of implementation. Sustainable food system, so the area of agricultural and related products, and perhaps we'll go into also employment and social implications. You mentioned the demographic challenge in Korea, and I think there is a topic we need to explore is how are we going to get all the workforce we need to insulate the houses, to renovate buildings, to do all that it will be necessary to get to climate neutrality in 2050. So this is what I wanted to say. I think I spoke for 15 minutes. I hope it was not too long, and I'm glad to take any questions if there are. And I will be actually very interested, Fanny, to receive the presentation and to keep in touch after the meeting as your study progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola, and likewise. I mean, we have an actual full-blown report coming up, but yes, the visuals can also make it a bit less, a bit more fun to follow. Okay, maybe fun is not the right word, but thank you very much for this comprehensive picture and those, insider insights. And you mentioned Horizon Europe. We have here the person from the team that is working hard to, make Korea Association to Horizon Europe work in practice. So Yael Song, who's a network and policy officer from the Korea EU Research Center, which is in Brussels. Yael, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this timely and important discussion. It's a pleasure to be here today to share some reflections on the Korea-EU Green Partnership. I already learned a lot from my previous speakers, and also I would like to receive your research and the slides later on. So I am Yael Song, a network and policy officer at the Korea-EU Research Center in Brussels. My organization's role is to promote research cooperation between Korea and the EU. So we supported a lot in the establishment of the digital partnership and the association to the Horizon Europe. Specifically, my main responsibility is to support and facilitate Korea's participation in Horizon Europe. So today I'm going to highlight Horizon Europe as a key instrument for Korea-EU green industrial leadership. For those who are not familiar with Horizon Europe, it is the research and innovation funding program of the European Union with a budget over 93 billion euro for 7 years. So it's one of the largest research funding program internationally. And there are 3 pillars in Horizon Europe, but today we will mainly discuss about second pillar called Global Challenges and European Industrial Competitiveness, which provides funding for international multilateral research projects. As you know, South Korea became associated country to Horizon Europe Pillar 2 starting from 2025. It means that Korean entities can apply for a Horizon Europe project and directly receive funding from the EU, just like member states. So this association will provide great opportunities for both Korean and European researchers, innovators, and stakeholders to collaborate with each other. Since I don't have much time, I will not go into the full political background of the agreement between Korea and the EU. I think it was very well handled by Ms. Fanny Sauvignon, so I will just point out some key points again. So what is important to understand is that following a series of global crises and geopolitical tensions, the need for strategic alliance with like-minded countries has grown significantly. In this context, Korea and the EU have become essential partners for each other, as they share same values and they have common goals across many sectors, including the green transition effort you mentioned earlier. As a result, over the past few years, they have concluded several important agreements, including the Green Partnership, Digital Partnership, and the Korea Association to Horizon Europe. With that said, we have saved about 10 hours of the political background, so I will now focus on why collaborations through Horizon Europe is so crucial for Korea-EU green industrial leadership. What's important to note is that Horizon Europe is strongly aligned with the EU's political priorities. In particular, the actions under the Pillar 2 are entirely top-down projects, where the scopes, expected outcomes, and impacts of each project are predefined. As you know, over the past few years, the top priorities of the European Commission has been the European Green Deal. So in line with this, Horizon Europe has allocated also like 35% of its budget to climate-related actions. In addition, the first key strategic orientation set out in the Horizon Europe Strategic Plan 2025 to 2027 is also focused on the green transition. In a sense, we can say that most of the Horizon project, in some way, they are contributing to the green transition. And it is backed by a study published by the European Parliament last year. According to the study, Horizon Europe is widely perceived by industry and other stakeholders as a key instrument supporting the green transition and the greening of the EU supply chain. And according to the report, also Horizon Europe Pillar 2 clusters have mobilized more than 9 billion euros for Green Deal related projects in first 3 years. And let's go deeper in Horizon Europe Pillar 2 and how it connects with the green transition. So as I mentioned earlier, the Pillar 2 addresses global challenges and it boosts European industrial competitiveness. And we can ask simple questions like, what are the global challenges and in what issue the entire globe is responsible for? I'm sure that on the top of your mind must be some keywords like climate changes, environmental pollution, or supply chains. And what about the industrial competitiveness? What's the connection with the green transition? Without a doubt, the green transition has become absolutely central to the industrial competitiveness today. Maybe in the past, it was just a regulatory or ethical obligation, but now it is widely recognized as a strategic economic advantage, especially in the field of research and innovation. The focus on advancing critical technologies is aimed at making them more sustainable and environmentally friendly. Why? Because ultimately innovation can help reduce production costs, lower energy consumption, and lead to the creation of more efficient products, services, or processes, which all lead to the industrial competitiveness. And most importantly, while there are many levers we can use to achieve the green transition, such as regulatory frameworks, trade policies, or public-private partnerships, I believe the fundamental transformational change can only be driven by the research and innovation. So the pillar 2 has the structured around 6 thematic areas. The first 3 clusters are focusing on the primarily on societal challenges and the citizens' well-being, including health, culture, or civil security. But the remaining 3 clusters that account for more than 3/4 of the pillar 2 budget are oriented more towards to the industrial competitiveness and the sustainability, including the cluster 4, digital industry and space, cluster 5, climate, energy, and mobility, cluster 6, food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture, and environment. So with this framework in mind, I would like to share how Korea and Europe have collaborated for green transition through the Horizon Europe program. However, it's a bit early to talk about the results of the Korea's association to Horizon Europe, as the association only started in 2025 and the first application period will begin very soon. So in fact, the work program 2025 is expected to be announced very soon. And accordingly, many Horizon Europe info days are planned throughout May. And that's why I'm also organizing tomorrow a webinar on work program 2025 for Korean researchers. So we are at the very beginning of our journey in participating in Horizon Europe. But fortunately, even before the association, Korea could participate in Horizon project as a third country. For example, in Horizon 2020, South Korea participated in 85 projects over 7 years. And in Horizon Europe, which started in 2021, by so far, Korea has taken part in more than 50 projects already. And some of the recent examples in green transition related projects include developing new pathways for climate action, urban planning with a focus on climate change, mitigating transport-related air pollution, advancing hydrogen transportation technologies, and developing innovative technologies for solar power generation, and more. So what's next? What will change after the association? And will there be many participation from South Korea? And in which projects can Korea and Europe collaborate together? And many people ask us whether there is a strong interest from Korean researchers and how actively Korea will participate in Horizon Europe. From my perspective here in Brussels, as a main office for Horizon Europe for Korea, I can say that there are quite many interests from Korean side. Certainly, thanks to the association, there are increasing number of interests, and without doubt, the Korea's participation will increase significantly. For example, in our webinar tomorrow, there are already more than 300 registrants, and that's quite a lot for one single webinar. And also my colleague is now speaking at the other info day right now for the Korean researchers. So in addition, major Korean corporations, including some globally recognized companies, including shipbuilding companies or construction associations, have already shown their strong interest in Horizon Europe project, and the discussions are ongoing. Moreover, over the past few years, many industry players and the research institute have opened their offices in Europe, as collaboration with European partners and access to the European market have become increasingly important in the context of the recent development of the Korea-EU relations. And many of them were actually focusing on the green technologies, climate research, and green energy, including hydrogen and renewable energy solutions. I think it is fair to say that many people associate Horizon Europe with green actions. I think it's because Horizon Europe is closely aligned with the EU's green transition ambitions, and the EU has been promoting it very strongly. Finally, to wrap up my speech, I would like to introduce few upcoming collaboration opportunities through Horizon Europe. So here are some examples of green transition related themes according to the work program 2025. Achieving global leadership in climate neutral, circular, and digitized industrial and digital value chain, climate sciences and responses for the transformation towards climate neutrality, cross-sectoral solutions for the climate transition, efficient, sustainable, and inclusive energy use, clean and competitiveness solutions for all transport modes, circular economy and bioeconomy sectors, environmentally friendly food systems, land, ocean, and water for climate action, clean environment and zero pollution, innovative governance, environmental observation, and digital solutions in support of the European Green Deal. For your information, there are 32 so-called destinations across Pillar 2, and these were some examples of the 32 destinations, and they are open for Korean participations as well. So I sincerely hope that many Korean researchers will participate in these actions and help boost Korea-EU green industrial leadership together. We will do everything possible to support them in making their collaboration successful. To conclude, I want to emphasize that research and innovation are key to achieving our common green transition objectives, and we are seeing a growing interest from both Korea and Europe to collaborate in these areas. The agreement on South Korea's association to Horizon Europe will play a vital role in facilitating this cooperation, and we hope to see active participation from both sides as well as we work together to realize our shared ambitions. I think that was enough from me, so thank you for listening.
Thank you, Yale. Very informative. Good luck with the webinar tomorrow, and congratulations for all the activities you're doing. The reports on the Korea-Europe Research Center websites have always been very useful for researchers like us, so please keep them coming. Now I'm happy to pass the floor to my colleague, Christian Dietz, researcher in climate policy at SEPS. He will present on the emissions and economic growth profile of Korea and move on to what we've been waiting for as well, opportunity areas for strengthening the EU-South Korea partnership. One small reminder that you can post your questions in the chat. We'll have some time at the end for Q&A, and the research team is curious to know your questions, your remarks, anything you would like us to discuss and that you don't see us discussing so far, although we're really touching on very many topics. Okay, Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fanny, and thank you to all previous speakers for the important remarks and also setting the scene in terms of what we have already experienced in terms of EU-South Korea partnership. So basically the strong foundation we can build on for future collaboration. And I'm also happy to hear that I think there will be some overlaps with opportunities that we see also for the future with what also previous speakers have mentioned. But before we go into the opportunities for future collaboration, we also want to set the scene first a bit to give an overview of the emission profile of Korea, how it has developed over time, what are the key technologies on the decarbonisation pathway at the moment. So this can then lead to potential further collaboration opportunities. So let me start also by doing a bit of a recap. So South Korea's economy has over the last decades really industrialized very strongly, moving from heavy industries now towards more clean tech, for example, batteries. And due to this focus on industries, we can also see that the South Korean economy has quite a large dependence on export. So it's really an export-led strategy. The export dependency ratio hovered around 40% in 2013, and although there were some fluctuations over time, it still now has basically come to those levels. Also, as I mentioned, the manufacturing industry continues to play a very important role for South Korea's economy. And we can also see this economic focus reflected in the emission profile of South Korea. When we look over at the evolution over time from 1990 to 2021, we see that the greenhouse gas emissions of South Korea has grown gradually from until 2018, where they peaked before, despite the rebound around the COVID pandemic. They then have ever since decreased to a level of 724 million tons of CO2 equivalents. And if we look at the composition of the emission profile, as I mentioned, there we can see also the footprint of the economy, basically, because we can see that the energy and the industries, so industrial processes and product use, IPPU, in this graph, are really the major contributors to the emission profile of South Korea. At the same time, and this is also where we have similarities with the EU, both countries have committed to a 2050 climate neutrality targets and have set intermediate targets for 2030. South Korea attempts to strives for a reduction of 40% compared to the 2018 baseline. So when we look at the emission profile, you can immediately see that achieving those objectives can only work with industrial decarbonization and a decarbonization of the energy mix. Those are really the key pillars to look at for South Korea's decarbonization in the future. Also, quite similar also to the EU, where also, of course, energy decarbonization and industry decarbonization are really focus areas. When we focus or look into the details of how energy sectors and key emission-intensive industries like minerals, chemical, and metal industries, how their emission footprint has evolved over time, we see that is very much in line also with the general emission footprint development of South Korea, because as I've seen, it's a major contributor, so it really also drives the overall emission development. And we can see that, until 2018, there was a gradual increase. However, ever since that time, emissions from energy and sectors and the selected energy intensive industries have more or less been stagnating. So it's really a challenge now to address this and drive further decarbonization in those areas to bring down overall greenhouse gas emissions of South Korea. However, there are also first signs of positive development when we look at the emissions and combining it with indicators for economic growth, so the growth of GDP over time, because we heard also from previous speakers that it is the objective to really make green technology or clean technology a driver of economic growth in South Korea. So it is important to decouple emissions from economic growth. And here we have recent data from the biannual transparency report that was recently submitted to the UNFCCC by South Korea. Here we have, since 2010, a first signs of a decoupling of those emissions from economic growth. However, of course, those trends need to be sustained and even further enhanced if Korea really wants to achieve or realize the ambition to turn green growth into the new economic model while also bringing down emissions. And how does South Korea want to achieve this decarbonization? Here also previous speakers already alluded to, a key concept or a key act is the Carbon Neutrality Act that came into force in 2021, which basically sets the framework for the decarbonization pathways in the next decades to come. Here, a strong focus is on clean technologies, Research and development, but also the commercialization of these technologies to make the business case for the clean tech is seen really as some of the key pillars to achieve this green growth model. Plus, we have some specific technologies also mentioned in the Carbon Neutrality Act, for example, like carbon capture, use and storage, which is considered one of the opportunities to decarbonize or reduce emissions of hard-to-abate sectors. So, for example, energy intensive industries like metal, chemicals, and so on. Those are usually considered hard to abate. And here CCUS is one of the potential technologies to look at. In addition to this technological focus or perspective on decarbonization, there's also the role of enhancing carbon sinks. So, for example, forests and wetlands in South Korea, but also making use of global cooperation mechanisms. For example, under the Paris Agreement, Article 6, where collaboration is allowed in the form of carbon credits, where South Korea sees an opportunity to also engage in international mitigation projects to contribute to achieving their nationally determined contributions, so their climate targets in that way. However, we also heard that although we basically don't question at the moment if Korea wants to achieve this green growth model, but the question is how. And here, previous speakers have already alluded to that political alternance plays a role, and we will likely see or have to wait also for the outcome of the 2025 elections to have a clearer picture on how the decarbonization pathway will be shaped in specific for the coming years. In our report, we have therefore looked at different parts which we believe are important in terms of the clean transition of South Korea. First of all, we have taken a look at, to basically set the scene, the national climate ambition, what climate targets want to be achieved, what are the decarbonization pathways basically on the roadmap, and then for one of the focus areas, as I mentioned, decarbonizing power generation and energy intensive industries. We have particularly looked at technologies like hydrogen. We heard from previous speakers that this is one of the key technologies considered. There is a hydrogen roadmap in place with ambitious roadmaps to really turn South Korea into a hydrogen hub. And we also looked at other technologies. I mentioned CCUS, so carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies, and offshore wind as one of the renewable energy technologies which will play an important role for decarbonizing the energy grid of South Korea. And then, because those clean technologies need a framework to have a clear business case, we looked at the existing frameworks that South Korea has already established, like carbon pricing, the Korean emission trade through the Korean emission trading system, Korean public procurement, for example, by introducing non-price criteria in public procurement guidelines, or also to incentivize private demand labeling schemes, which are already also in place or used to some extent in South Korea. And when we analyzed those areas and also discussed this with stakeholders during a workshop we had a couple of weeks back, we then dived into what potential areas or what are potential pathways to further strengthen collaboration in these aspects, where mutual learning can really enhance the clean transition both in the EU but also in South Korea, of course. And this is the third part, and I hope one of the most interesting parts of the report that you will soon be able to read. It's where we see those areas for strengthening the EU-South Korea partnership. And here I try to now cluster it a bit in like pillars where we see strengthening could be useful in terms of the EU-Korea partnership. And the first one is the innovation and deployment of clean technologies. Here, in terms of renewable energy, we mentioned offshore wind before. Here, particularly when we look at joint R&D and joint projects on lower wind speeds and floating turbines, we see as an important opportunity for collaboration between EU and South Korea to really extend the deployment of renewable energies in South Korea, where it is challenged by also geographic limitations. In terms of carbon capture and storage, here also in the EU, industrial carbon management is basically back on the agenda. Frameworks are being set up to make the business case for those kind of technologies. And as it is also a strong pillar in South Korea, we see that collaboration can also there be strengthened, particularly looking at hard-to-abate sectors like steel, cement, and petrochemicals, which are really the driving emitting industries in South Korea. And then when we look at R&D and innovation ecosystems, I think you can luckily very easily reference our previous speaker from the KERC. We see that the accession now of South Korea to Horizon Europe is a great opportunity to further promote joint research, for example, in areas of hydrogen, energy, and digital technologies. But also from our stakeholder workshops, we also learned that due to complexities of Horizon Europe, there's a need for support, really to access this kind of funding. But I think my colleague Fanny will also then allude to that in a bit more details. And then also in terms of collaboration R&D, we also see that the collaboration has to go, of course, beyond R&D. So also in terms of deploying those new innovative technologies then in the EU and South Korea. So here fostering peer-to-peer networks between EU and Korean businesses can really help to foster collaboration on that. So this is the innovation and deployment of clean technologies side. But we also talked about that one of the focus areas of the report is also those enabling frameworks for clean technologies. And this is also, I mean, very high on the agenda of the EU now, also particularly through the Clean Industrial Deal. And we have lots of overlaps already in terms of how this framework or like the pillars of those frameworks in EU and South Korea. And one is carbon pricing. We heard that both the EU and Korea have emission trading systems in place. Lots of collaboration has been already happening with mutual learning, for example, from the EU ETS on the Korean ETS on prices and allowances. But we also saw that, for example, in terms of sectoral coverage, the K ETS, when we look at waste, is already maybe a bit ahead of the EU ETS. So there's really space for mutual learning, and this can be further strengthened. Also, I guess here we have to mention also CBAM and the alignment so with CBAM and monitoring, reporting, and verification mechanisms to really make to enhance trade also in low carbon goods. And in more maybe domestic look, lead markets and low carbon standards we see as another important opportunity for collaboration. Here the EU through the Clean Industrial Deal really wants to create Lead markets meaning developing markets which are particularly suitable to absorb the green premium, so the price difference between conventional and low carbon goods without heavily increasing the final price of the goods. So for example, for this are automotive sectors or buildings for green steel, just to give a bit more illustrative example. And here, both the EU and Korea have already the pillars in place through public procurement, through voluntary labels, and believe that here collaboration on a bit more the technical side of setting up those systems can be mutually very beneficial. We also briefly mentioned renewable energy through wind power, and here also the EU faces the challenge of adapting the grid to this higher share of renewables. Plus the whole challenge of modernizing the grid. And here we see that cooperation on this, mutual learning, can be a potential other areas. Plus integrating this also with the digital energy nexus. So looking at smart grids, decentralized energy systems, of that what we need to really have also a higher share of renewable energy in the systems, we believe is a key area of collaboration in the future. And then because the EU-Korea Green Partnership is not only about bilateral collaboration, but also about promoting shared priorities globally to basically leverage the influence of both partners and drive global climate ambition. Here we see that the EU and Korea can exchange in a deeper dialogue on, for example, the use of carbon credits to achieve climate targets, to potentially set standards in that way, or like be a role model how to do this in a robust way. Because also, I mean, we learned before that for South Korea, it's been part of the decarbonization pathway at least since the Carbon Neutrality Act. For the EU now, through the discussions around the 2040 targets and the review of the emission trading system in 2026, also the integration of carbon removals is being discussed again. This could be a potential area to see how this could be done in an aligned manner, and then also promote shared priorities in this context, also on the international climate level, for example, through the Paris Agreement, so basically COPs. And lastly, speaking about COPs, climate finance was one of the key discussion points at COP29 last year. We saw that we need a lot of money, of course, to achieve the climate targets, and a lot of it has to come from private sector. So we see here it as another opportunity to strengthen collaboration on leveraging private finance. South Korea is here particularly well positioned through hosting the GCF. Both nations are interested in using, for example, green bonds to leverage private finance. So those are all, we believe, important areas. But while I now basically gave a long list of areas where we think it could merit to dive deeper into those topics through the EU-Korea partnership, my colleague Fanny will now give you something a bit more tangible on the mechanisms, how we could maybe achieve that in some areas.
Thank you, Chris. No, that was very tangible. And thank you, because you met those opportunity areas and then their challenges, from a climate policy expert perspective. But of course, as a foreign policy researcher, I'm coming back with some, diplomatic observations that we have made during the research and throughout the report. We already mentioned CBAM several times. How engaged Korean partners have been so far from the moment it was announced, from industries to governments to the research sector, CBAM remains a challenging topic in EU diplomacy in general, because it's quite comprehensive, and it should come with a lot of implementation support. There is already since recently a task force at DG Klima on I think it's international. I don't have the title in front of me, markets diplomacy and carbon pricing, really on those topics. And on the other side, sort of also really recent developments, the Korean government is setting up a specific office in the Ministry of Environment to deal with international cooperation with global climate policy, such as CBAM. And as Nicola mentioned earlier, there's the Trade and Sustainable Development chapter of the FTA. So we have, some bilateral, dialogues for this. There's a green partnership. There's the task force on the Commission side. There's a new office on the Korea side, but maybe something more could be necessary to breach them. Now that, CBAM will not, there will be no major changes to CBAM. Obviously, we're not talking about negotiation here. We're talking about diplomatic dialogues and implementation, and reducing potential friction with industries or among different public, private, civil society sector partners, because CBAM is always discussed, but maybe there could be a mechanism. I'm saying, for example, a joint task force, meaning between not an EU initiative, but a bilateral or trilateral, I will explain why, between the EU and Korea mechanism for implementation. I am also mentioning the possibility to make it trilateral with Japan, because as of recently, Korea and Japan have decided to collaborate on global climate policies, how to respond to the EU CBAM. So there is an opportunity here. Now, of course, there's the EU task force, and the EU has a lot of international partners to explain CBAM to, and to support implementation. And at the same time, as we've seen, Korea, and also, of course, Japan, Korea is a very important strategic partners in all policy areas, most recently, strengthen security partnerships. So there is an incentive to close any potential diplomatic gap and, align further on CBAM, because it's an issue that comes, that has consistently been important to South Korea. This idea is also a similar but different example that I was thinking of when jotting down this possibility is there is an EU Indonesia Malaysia task force for the implementation of the EU deforestation regulation, respective also to the context of these partners palm oil industries. And these task force make a lot of progress on the ground, talking to the relevant stakeholders and really unpacking what an EU regulation means for its external partners, but in a dialogue that is specific to the needs, to the industries, to the political economy of those partners. So there's really a potential here to go, take the next step. Maybe it's already happening. This is just, an observation in this at this point in time. Public diplomacy initiatives were already emphasized through different presentations, and the importance of business ties and the importance of research ties with Horizon Europe. Maybe one more emphasis here to complement those EU and member states as well, public diplomacy activities that are already based on the knowledge that trust building engagement, people to people engagement is really important. Maybe the further integration of social sciences, policy research, so climate and energy policy research for mobility in bilateral programs for really long-term mutual understanding, not just on scientific innovation, which is already extremely important and underway, but also or frameworks to understand policy, or EU Korean paradigm, something reciprocal. And that could also help us to foster better innovation ecosystems, as my colleague has mentioned. So these were some additional diplomatic recommendations, so to speak. And I think we could directly move to Q&A. That's possible. And then maybe Chris, it's unless people want to keep looking at this slide, which I highly doubt, we can. Yeah, thank you. There was one question already in the chat, so that I will read. It was somebody was asking, thank you for your question, if there is any cooperation between the EU and ROK in green transition diplomacy, and what are some concrete examples. So and Nicola will also give you the floor after that. You mentioned the FTA TSD chapter. You mentioned the working group on the green transition since 2018. You mentioned the Green Partnership itself and how it was complemented with the Green Partnership program that is run from Seoul, and that since last year has been hosting a lot of activities such as youth climate discussions, cooperation on plastics, pollution, etc. And for having spoken to the team doing great work in Seoul. Oh, okay. Thank you. Nicola has to go, but thank you. It was great to hear from you, and speak soon. We'll keep in touch. Thanks. So back to the EU-ROK Green Partnership Program and its activities in Seoul. We've spoken to the team regularly because they're really active. And in 2025, two planned activities caught our eyes on green shipping corridors, dialogues between governments, and one on offshore wind, study trips for businesses. So everything we've discussed so far really with concrete examples. One last thing I want to mention we haven't discussed before is not only between the EU and Korea, but between EU member states and Korea, are there some bilateral green diplomacy programs, mentioning, for example, and we discussed it during a past workshop, South Korea, Denmark, Green Growth Alliance since 2011 already, and nowadays focusing on offshore wind and green hydrogen, Korean-German energy partnerships, and of course, on nuclear, a long-running Korea-France joint coordinating committee on nuclear energy. So those are my answers on the diplomatic mechanism. I don't see necessarily many questions coming in the chat. So if my colleagues want to say something, if you want to react to the presentations, you're more than welcome to do so in the remaining time that we have. That was a lot of information, right? Okay, Chris, sorry, I see you unmuted.
Oh, no. So I don't have any further remarks. I just saw that we are approaching probably also the end of the workshop. I don't know if there are any more questions. I can't see them.
I'm not sure. So to you, Chris, or I can close the workshop, up to you. Okay. All right. I'm being volunteered. Right. So thank you so much for today's discussion. Once again, these are based on the report that is coming out very soon on the CEPS website, and a report that has been based on research supported by the Korea Foundation. So we are really grateful for that support. We will all promote this report once it's out. And thank you all for taking part in the conversation today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for organizing this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.